Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Hank Phillippi Ryan. Hank is the on-air investigative reporter for Boston's WHDH-TV. She's won 37 Emmys and dozens more honors for her groundbreaking journalism. The nationally best-selling author of 14 thrillers, Ryan's also an award winner in her second profession with 5 Agathas, 5 Anthonys, 2 Macavitys, the Daphne, and for the other woman, the coveted Mary Higgins Clark Award. Wow. I mean, I don't know if someone's done the math on that, but it's like 100 million. 100 million awards for Hank. Critics call Hank a master of suspense and a superb and gifted storyteller, and she is the only author to have won the Agatha in 4 different categories: Best First Novel, Best Short Story, and Best Nonfiction. Holy cow. Welcome, Hank.
That's great, Danielle. I love that. 100 million. It's got to be true.
I think I did the math pretty well. It's dang close to 100 million. So thank you so much for joining us. Hank is not only a really good friend, but I'm a huge fan of Hank's writing and her stories, and have been since the beginning. So I'm so thrilled to have you here today, joining us to talk about, I think, what maybe my favorite Hank Phillippi Ryan book, The House Guest. So please tell our listeners and viewers about The House Guest.
Oh my golly, thank you. Just everything you said, just back at you. It's just this crazy world of authors and author pals is really so endlessly wonderful. And the idea that we can know each other and know about each other's lives and chat with each other like this, I mean, it's terrific. And I'm a huge fan of yours. So,
you're so sweet.
I can't wait to talk to you about your books. But let me show you, Danielle.
Yes.
Look,
this is very gorgeous.
Out of the very first box.
I mean, look how beautiful. And I noticed Her Perfect Life is behind you on the door. That's your covers are always so fantastic.
Well, we should talk about this before I tell you about the book. I mean, I agree with you about the covers. And what I said to Forge, my darling publisher, I said, I want her to look enigmatic, like she has a secret, like we're not quite sure whether she's good or bad, could go either way. She certainly has some sort of agenda. You know, she's not just coming over to have a glass of wine and sit in the sun. This woman has something on her mind. So the house guest stars Alyssa McAllen. And we love Alyssa McAllen, but she's very sad. Alyssa has just been dumped by her rich and powerful and quite manipulative husband without a word, without a warning. She's been a great wife for 8 years. She can't figure out why he's gone. She's done absolutely nothing. And very happy. So Bill has threatened to take the house and the money and the paintings and the Cape Cod house, and has already taken all the friends. So Alyssa thinks, you know, when in a nasty divorce, in a surprising divorce, one spouse gets all the friends, and what does the other one get? If they're lucky, they get the benefits. So Alyssa, just when the time is right, meets a new friend, a seductive kind of new ally, surprising one, who has some problems of her own. And these two women decide that maybe they can solve each other's problems. And when the FBI comes knocking at the door, that's when the action really takes off. And it's interesting because it's been compared to Gaslight meets Thelma and Louise by way of Strangers on a Train. And you can sort of get that from it. You know, Gaslight, the little manipulation, Thelma and Louise, 2 powerful, strong female characters, and Strangers on a Train, you know what that is. But maybe the book isn't that. That's the kind of gaslighting part as well. So it's 2 smart women facing off in a high-stakes psychological cat and mouse game to prove their truth about a devastating financial crime. But which woman is the cat and which woman is the mouse? And that is the house guest.
That is the house guest. That is the you're on the edge of your seat now, like, oh my God, I got to get my hands on this book. So can you tell, is there a specific, always want to hear about like how the story came, like, was there a specific inspiration for the story or a seed, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I love that question. I know you know well that a lot of authors hate it because they're like, I don't know where it came from. I'm just lucky. I don't know. But I can tell you a little bit about a couple of places that this idea came from. And when you have a good idea, and I know you know this, Danielle, when you have a good idea, it's like when you drop a pebble into a pond and the ripples just start going out. And when you have a good idea, that pebble idea, you can feel the ripples and you can say to yourself, oh, I have no idea what's going to happen in this book, but that could be a good story. That could be a good story. So one of the puzzle piece pebbles, to mix metaphors, one of the pebbles was the pandemic. And I know this sounds so crazy, but my husband is a criminal defense attorney. And I'm a writer and a reporter. So every day for the past 27 or however many years we've been married before the pandemic, he'd go off to his law office every morning and I'd go off to Channel 7 to do my job as a reporter. And we didn't see each other all day. So that's typical. When the pandemic started, Jonathan took over the breakfast room as his law office. And that's where he does all of his work, which is just down the hall. And I'm here in my study, just down the hall from him. And I realized that we were both working all day, but I had no idea what he was doing. He could have been doing anything in the kitchen. I mean, like, he's in the kitchen and I'm here. He could be doing anything. I mean, I understand about lawyering and we talk about his cases in a general kind of way. And he's a wonderful, marvelous person, but what was he doing in there?
That's your crime writer brain. It's not that Jonathan was doing anything wrong. It's that, there's a husband in the other room, and an unsuspecting wife married so long, like, you just start to take for granted that they're doing their job. But
and you say, "How was your day, honey?" And he says, "Fine." And also, Danielle, I'm in here in my little study, writing my book. I could be doing anything. I could be writing all work and no play makes Hank a dull girl over and over and over and over, like in Shining. He wouldn't know. I could be writing anything. So I started thinking, how well do we really know our loved ones, our spouses, our significant others, the people that we consider friends? How well do we really know who's sleeping next to us? Could they be keeping a secret? So there's that. Very powerfully driven home to me. And then I remembered that a million years ago, in a complete other part of my life, I had a friend. She was a great woman. She was happily married. And every day she would get up and go to work and send her husband off to whatever job he had, he was like an accountant or a insurance person, something that had to do with money and sales. And every night she'd come home and she'd say, "How did it go?" And he'd say, "The next big deal is right around the corner. The next big sale is right around the corner." And she was very supportive. And as I keep saying, she's a very smart woman, until one day the police came to their door. And it turned out that he had never gone to work, that he never had a job, that this was all completely a fantasy, and that he had been home on the computer doing things that I don't even want to go into, but were just extraordinarily, disgustingly illegal. And she had no idea. She just didn't know. And, at first I thought, come on, you're not paying attention. How could you not know? But the pandemic taught me that you could not know.
Of course, yeah.
And how then? And we're still talking about the house guest. I'm going to show you this cover again.
Beautiful.
How then does a person come back from that? How do you regain your power? How do you get your own life back? How do you shed that pity of other people, or by association of other people? How do you get yourself back? And it's a thriller. It's a murder mystery. That's what the house guest is, a psychological thriller. But that was what the themes are. How well do who we think we love And how do we get our lives back after a devastating discovery like that?
God, and actually I think it's so relevant because we've all heard, especially if you think about like before you could be tracked by your phone and all, like nowadays if you were suspicious, or you could always be like, well, there he is, my husband's at work, I can see that that's where his phone is. But before that, we really didn't have a way to track people. And if you're in a relationship with another adult, what you think is a trustworthy adult, and you don't have evidence, and of course we want to believe that our spouses are trustworthy, so we don't search for evidence that they're not. I can actually, and I can imagine how that poor woman too, because how frustrating is it, and just like for Alyssa, how frustrating is it for her to think that to realize that she didn't even know what her husband was thinking, and she's going to get pity, she's going to feel stupid, and it's on top of the heartache, there's that whole thing. And it sets her up in a beautiful way at the beginning of this, for this book, which is amazing. And so your books always feature, I think, in my head, women that are grappling with power, right? Whether it
Yes.
be jobs, money, relationships, and often against sort of a stronger and better equipped opponents. So what about that interests you? I can imagine a million reasons, but what do you think about that?
It's I love that observation. Wow, and you're exactly right. My books are about power. My books are about people who want something. And the question is, how far will they go to get it? And I think a lot of women are sort of brought up, in my day, they were brought up to make everybody be happy, to make everything work, to make everybody happy, to make the family work, to make their business work, to make their jobs work. They were going to be the ones to be the facilitators and the producers and the organizers and the ones, that people say, I just don't know how you do that all. It's just, you're so great, right? And sometimes there are people whose desires and whose power wants something else, and they will use you, and they will step on you, and they will manipulate you, and they will gaslight you to get you to do what they want. And sometimes you just don't know it. because when a person is an optimist and a good person and just trying to make everything in everyone's life be fabulous, you might not notice that. You just might not notice that someone doesn't have your benefit at heart. And I think that all of us, especially these days, are struggling to say, wait a minute, I'm important, I count, I have goals, I have my own needs and desires, I have my own hopes for success and happiness. And wait a minute, get out of my way. It's my turn. So it's a juggle. It's really a juggle, and it's a balance. And that power, how people, my books are not violent. There's no graphic sex. There's no graphic violence. There's not even inappropriate language. But there's gaslighting, and there's manipulation, and there's the evil that we do to each other psychologically, that sometimes manipulation and gaslighting that we do to each other's minds is just as devastating sometimes as the destruction of a gun or a knife. It can ruin that destabilization, that disequilibrium. And that's what begins The House Guest. And that's what begins all my books as well, is this sort of disequilibrium, someone who thinks everything is fine, and it's just, with a knock on the door or a meeting someone else, it's just not fine. And that's what to explore as well.
And I think the thing that's so lovely actually is, I think, of course, a lot of books that we read and I love, and including my own, are more, they do have the graphic sort of violence in them, but there is something almost more evil in some ways about these manipulators, because it's easy to see when a knife is unsheathed that someone is threatening you, but to see it when it's done in manipulation by somebody, sort of sucking up to you, or pretending to get, like, offering to give you what you want in a way that then twists back to their benefit. It's a darker, kind of more twisted type of situation, right? And happens to us all the time,
Oh, it
especially
definitely does.
women.
And especially, well, I think especially women.
Yeah.
Women. which is sort of crazy to say. But I mean, I think one of the ways that psychological manipulation is so successful is when someone pretends to be doing it for your own good. Sort of, oh, are you sure you want to do that? Listen, it's not exactly how. Let me just give you an idea, and I'm sure you're fine. I'm sure it'll be fine. But just let me say to you, what if this, have you ever thought about maybe he's not being that nice to you? Have you ever thought about maybe, and it just plants that little seed of doubt. And you begin to see your world in a different way, the way this person wants you to see it. And I'm not going to name any names of who's doing it in the house, because pretty much everybody is doing it to everybody, because everybody wants something, and everybody will do almost anything to get it. And I think that's such a pivotal thing. And
it is
friendship. I love to explore female friendship, because a woman who meets another woman Alyssa at the beginning of the book, let me say, meets someone whose life seems to be even in more upheaval than her own.
Right.
And Alyssa is basically such a good person. She realizes, what are the troubles of one little person like me? I'm well off. I'm happy. I'm just a little bit sad. Get over it, sister. I'm going to help someone else. And that's how the book begins, with Alyssa helping someone else. And that's her goal.
Which is also, I think, a very female thing, because you take it back to sort of the caretaking and the woman's job as smoothing everything over, making sure everybody's fine. Oftentimes, I think traditionally in front of us, like you're responsible. I mean, your children and your families and your neighbors and everybody sort of comes first. It's like, once everybody's happy, then I can worry about me. And yet, of course, we know how that turns out. And then women, because we are all in that position, sometimes are like the worst to each other, right? Because it's like, well, here's somebody finally, maybe I don't have to take care of. Maybe that person can take care of me, and I can just leverage a little something. So there's a sort of I don't know what to even say, a little bitchy balance here sometimes between
definitely
women.
Definitely so. But we're inclined, this is just such a generalization. We're inclined to think of the best of someone. We're inclined to think, oh, poor thing, let me help you. I've been there before. I feel I'm so sympathetic, because I completely understand where you are.
Exactly.
And we all, and you're such a good point, because we all have felt heartbroken and vulnerable, needy. And if just the right person comes at just the right time, we may be super vulnerable to that. I was doing some research about how women who don't know what their spouses were doing, and how often. And wow, Danielle, it's crazy scary. The BTK killer,
right?
A wife and 3 kids, no idea that he was stalking people and torturing them. No idea. The woman who dated and then married Ted Bundy, who said he seems like such a nice guy. I read about this case in the Midwest, where a woman thought her husband was maybe acting a little bit strange, but he was a quirky guy anyway. And one day, one of their children came home from being out in the woods in their backyard, and brought home a skull. And so that was buried in the woods in their backyard. And so the wife, of course, takes it to the husband and says, look what Jimmy found in the backyard. And the husband says, oh, yes, that's my father's old medical skeleton from medical school. And the woman says, oh, okay. And not like, why would you bury your father?
Right.
And so finally one day, she got a little bit suspicious, because he was kind of being gone at strange times. She called the police about the skull. They went out into the backwoods, and there were at least 11 people that he had killed. About thousands of bones, this article said. And she just didn't know. She just didn't know. I mean, it's. And then on the white collar side, I'm just going to babble on the white collar side.
No, it's good.
Think about Bernie Madoff.
Oh, right.
His wife. And I read a story about, I guess it was Nicole Kidman. Nicole Kidman who played June Madoff? Is her name June or Ruth? One of Mrs. Madoff.
I can't remember. Yeah.
Anyway, whoever Mrs. Madoff was, I can't remember her name. And Michelle Pfeiffer said that she met absolutely no one who thought that Mrs. Madoff knew anything about
Right.
what her husband was doing, that she has always insisted she didn't know.
Right.
People and colleagues insist, no, she just didn't know. And we think, oh, please, you have to know. But maybe she did, maybe she didn't. So does Alyssa know what her husband may or may not be doing? Does she or doesn't she?
It's such a good, I mean, it's just such a great setup because of course, especially like as you say, in like the Madoff case, we so many people lost so much money that we're like, what was wrong with her that she didn't see it? Or like the BTK killer, like your husband is a serial killer and you don't know it. But I think there's an argument on both sides, 100%. So it's such a fascinating, I mean, it's such a fascinating setup, and it's very believable. I mean, we hear these things and they always sort of strike us as being unbelievable, but they happen all the time. So clearly it's not unusual, right?
Well, it's not unusual. It's a little unusual.
I mean, the extremes, or yeah, maybe the serial killer and the Madoff, but in little ways, I think that the discussion or the question of how well you know the person that you share your life with is very valid. I mean, there are things we just probably don't know, which is a little bit scary, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit scary, but it certainly is fodder for a good
Great
plot. I
fodder.
read this article
Totally.
about an organization called the White Collar Project, and it's an organization of women whose spouses have committed white collar crimes and who have been arrested for white collar crimes. And the woman who runs it is this marvelous woman, and she says, by far most women have no idea what their husbands are doing until the feds come to the door. They just don't know.
So when we talk about all the seeds for, your books, I mean, you also have this incredibly successful career as a, I mean, very high, very highly regarded journalist, all the awards, all that. And I always wondered, because of course, that none of these people are reporters in this book, but do you find that your own experiences in that world kind of feed into your stories? I mean, how do you leverage your own experiences, probably as not only just as an incredible journalist, but as a woman journalist, and the challenges of that? Where does that show up? Because I know it must, right?
Well, that is such a long story. We should talk about it and all that leading up to it another time, because it is pretty valuable. But a couple of quick things. I've been a television reporter for 43 years, which is crazy. I've wired myself with hidden cameras. I've confronted corrupt politicians. I've gone undercover and in disguise and chased down criminals. I've been at SWAT team things and fires and murders and political conventions and tornadoes and hurricanes, and interviewed murderers and had people confess to murder, and have people who are convicted of murder insist they didn't do it. And so it would be silly to not to mention, exactly as you say, sort of battling as a woman. I started in radio in 1970, when there were no women in broadcasting. I got my job because I was a woman. There's no question about that. Jane Pauley, Barbara Walters, Jessica Savage, Leslie Stahl, we all got our jobs because we were women. Back in the 70s, when the equal opportunity laws were new, I mean, I walked into the radio station and said, I'm here to apply for a job as a reporter. And the news director said, that's great. Where has been have you had any experience as a reporter? And we went through this whole job interview where I had no experience at all. And finally, at the end of this interview, where his eyes were just getting bigger and bigger because I was so completely unqualified, he goes, you have no experience at all as a reporter. I mean, I was 20. You have no experience at all as a reporter. He said, can you give me one reason why I should hire you? And I said, yes, I can. I said, because your license is up for renewal at the Federal Communications Commission right now, and you don't have any women working here. And then I just smiled. And the next day I had my first job in broadcasting. So Jane Pauley calls us the class of 1970.
I love it.
Isn't it? The women who started in broadcasting in the early 70s because of the equal opportunity laws. And we knew enough to say, you know what, you're going to get in trouble if you don't hire me.
I
But
love it. I love it. Well, way to turn the power back.
yes,
I mean,
yeah, exactly. Thank you.
that was very, and also I was gonna say 43 years in broadcasting. I'm just, the math says you were like 5 when you started. So that's the other thing. So, and then you mentioned a lot about, so your research and this, because you are, your background is journalism. How do you get yourself to do enough research and not sort of get lost in all the other stories, because you must have such an ability to research, so much passion for research. How do you go about looking at a new story?
I am the luckiest person in the world because as a television reporter, I was a general assignment reporter for years and then an investigative reporter for many years. And as a reporter, you know that your goal is to get a good story. You know that your goal is to have someone say at the end of the day, wow, that was a good story. I could not stop watching. So think about it as for writing a novel. That's exactly what we're going for too. Wow, that's a good story. I could not put it down. So as a reporter, after all these years for a long time, writing a story every day, you begin to organize in your brain what a good story needs and what it doesn't. No one knows what you leave out. Some of the things that we have in our brains as a result of research, we needed to know them, but we don't need to say them. So a good story in television and a good story in fiction has a beginning, middle, and an end. It has a character who you care about, an important problem that needs to be solved. There's going to be some clues and research and document searches along the way. In the end, the good guys win and the bad guys get what's coming to them, and you get some justice and you change the world a little bit. So in fiction and investigative reporting, it's exactly the same. So
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So if you think about it that way, from the time we were little and someone put us on their laps, if we were lucky, and said, once upon a time, and you think, oh, and the walls melt away and you know what's going to come, here comes a story. That's what I try to do. I want you to miss your stop on the subway because you can't put the book down. And I don't want you to turn the channel when you're watching my stories on TV. And I don't want you to be able to put the book down when you're reading my stories, my books. So it's the same momentum, forward motion, narrative thrust, whatever you want to call it. I'm advancing the story all the time. And anything that doesn't advance the story doesn't go in.
Absolutely. That's very fair. Right. So like you said, there's a whole bunch, there's a whole bunch of things about. In fact, you probably know a lot more about, the white collar crime stuff than shows up in the book, but it so that you know which pieces advance the plot, which pieces you can twist, because you're also famous for your twists. So that makes so much sense. Now,
let me tell you, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but all that stuff that we were talking about earlier about white collar crime and BTK, Madoff, none of that is in the book. Not one sentence. Right. Not one sentence of that. It's not what it's about.
No, but you know it because it helps you inform the characters, right? That these are real people who have been, potentially tricked by the people that they were closest to, which is
people think. What do they want? What would they do? What would they say? What would be their vulnerabilities and emotions and needs? That's what I take from the research.
Yeah, that's so smart. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And you can see it in your characters. I think your characters, are wonderfully well drawn, motivated. They're, when they make decisions that we're like, oh no, don't do that. It's because that was the decision they had to make from the place where they stood. And it's, and then sometimes we're like, oh no, that was the right thing to do, which is, I think, again, sort of the way that you do the clever twists and turns. So with that said, I have to ask, your stories there's a lot going on. There's a lot, this is not like a thin left, right end. So do you plot your stories, Hank, or what's your process for a new book?
Oh my golly. So there are days I just long for an outline because I have never made an outline in my life. I have no idea what's going to happen in the end. No idea. I don't know who's good or bad. I don't know who the bad guy is. I don't know who's good. I don't know what their motivations are. I just don't know. And the only thing that gets me, the thing that gets me to the computer every day actually is thinking, oh, I can't wait to find out what's going to happen. And the only way I can find out what happens is if I sit down and write it. I mean, I know my subconscious is working on it all the time. And sometimes I'll have a little moment when I'm writing when I'll think, ooh, then this, then this, then this, then this. But it really never goes farther than like 4 things that have to happen next. So, you know, every twist, every different thing, every unexpected thing in my book, I'm is unexpected to me too. And that's, you know, Sue Grafton used to call that the magic, that there's you know this. There's something that happens in the writer brain that if the characters are properly motivated, realistically, logically motivated, then their stories will unfold, and it almost brings you with them. I mean, I was at an amazing interview between Stephen King and Lee Child, if you can imagine, paragons, and they each said separately that there were times when they were having a good writing day that they felt that the character was just coming through them, that they were just almost transcribing. And you know those days, I know you can't make them happen. You just have to sit at your desk and do it and see how the story unfolds. Now, you asked me this great question about television earlier. Oh, I'm running out of time. Ask me
you go, girl. We're fine.
Asked me a great question about storytelling earlier and about television. And I don't know the end of my novels, but think about, I also don't know the end of my investigative stories, my news stories, because if I knew the ending, they wouldn't be new, right? It would be somebody else would have walked out.
Right.
So I go out as an investigative reporter. I go out in search of the story, And that's the same thing I'm doing, just sitting here at this desk. I'm writing in search of the story. So I think those years of writing without knowing the ending in real life makes it be less scary, not totally less scary, but somewhat less scary to sort of write without a net, trying to walk this story tightrope with the idea that I know that I've typed chapter 1 and that I have 385 pages to go, and I don't have any idea what's going to be on those pages. Why would we do that? You know,
I know it sounds like torture, but I think it's interesting. I think the fact that you don't know, that you are so comfortable with the not knowing the end of a story makes a lot of sense based on your experience, decades of experience in your job. I think I'm not an outliner too, and boy, I feel the same way. Like, wouldn't it be nice just to have some even just a line about what is, each thing that happens next, but the not knowing the ending and not knowing who is the bad guy or who's the good guy, that I find so interesting, Hank. But I guess it's true, absolutely, investigative reporting, right? We don't, oftentimes stories turn themselves on their heads, and who we think is a good guy is a bad guy, and vice versa.
And isn't that, that's a trap too, to decide too soon who's good or bad, because it makes you see the rest of the story through that filter. And you don't want a filter. You want reality, and you want an open mind. You want anything is possible, because in real life, anything is possible. So in a book, anything is possible. The characters just may be keeping secrets from us. Yeah. And so it's up to us to find them out.
That is so interesting. So now, with this, with all the, your job and the writing, you write a book a year. How do you structure your life to get everything done, Hank? We talked about women. I love the reference to everyone's always, that's the best compliment a woman can get. How do you manage it all? It's that like Enjante ad, I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan. Do you remember that from the 70s? So how do you manage it all?
That's interesting, because I would say, oh, I don't, it's a mess, it's a disaster. I'm just putting duct tape all over everything all the time. I love it first. I love it. I'm enthusiastic about it. I embrace it, the craziness. I can't tell you how many days I'll go out into my husband's office and say, this is not going to work. None of this is going to work. This is not sustainable. This is not sustainable. And he says, you always say that. I know. And I have lists and lists I have lists with priorities that are essentially numbered. There's nothing better than crossing something off the list. Sometimes I even put things on the list that I've already done so I can cross.
Me too. Love that.
So that sense of accomplishment. When you are doing something that you love, I think it makes it easier. I don't find the time for things. I make the time for things. I'm gonna do, like, my linen closet is probably not perfect looking, but who's going to really see that unless a house guest comes over? That's a problem. So I do it out of love. I do it out of joy. I do it out of deadline. Sometimes I sometimes do it out of fear. If I don't do this, then fill in the blank X, Y, and Z horrible thing, it could be. But I have I have an optimism about the world. I hope it's not misguided, but that basically I'm lucky and happy. I enjoy what I do. Everything I do is kind of fun, even if it isn't, because I'm just so lucky, and I'm aware of that every day and grateful for that every day. So yeah, I work really hard. Frankly, I work all the time. All the time. Nights and weekends. We haven't taken a vacation. We didn't before the pandemic. It's a lot of work, but this is my joy, is working.
Yeah.
And my husband has the same passion for his criminal defense and civil rights work. He feels the same way. So we're a good team.
Yes.
And now we're, very lucky.
Yeah. That sort of gratitude is a superpower. If you can be really grateful about your life, you can kind of make more things happen, I think. And you can't really make more time in a day, but you can certainly squeeze the juice out of every moment. And, to be honest, I don't really care about your linen closet as long as you're writing a book a year, Hank. That's my priority. So, I would say, what, if you were going to sort of give advice to, aspiring authors who do work full time? You've obviously always done it. I certainly wrote and worked full time for the first decade of my writing career. What advice would you give those women, or those people, those writers?
And those writers, it's a lot more difficult than you think it will be. The metabolism of the publishing world is can be very slow. There's almost no instant gratification about it, except maybe, for yourself, if you're having a good writing day. But people think, oh, I'm going to write a book. So how many times have people said to you, oh, I'm going to do that someday when I have time, or maybe this weekend? I think, good luck, sister, because that's not going to happen.
Right.
It's in the most wonderful way I can ever describe to you. It is very, very difficult. It is the most challenging thing you can ever do, but it's a doable thing. It's an attainable goal. Yes. It just takes sort of word by word by word by word, creating the very best story that you can every time. I would say to be persistent, to be almost obsessed, to be determined, to be open-minded. Someone else might have a good idea, not to be envious of other people. Don't compare yourself to other people, because you'll just spiral down into doing
right.
I'll do it, and it's such a mistake. To be optimistic about the possibility that you can do this. My husband and I don't celebrate the anniversary of the day we met. We celebrate the anniversary of the day before we met. And we call that You Never Know Day. We call that You Never Know Day, because you never know what wonderful thing is around the next corner. One day I did, and the next.
I love that.
So
I have to do some math. I have to find the what if day for us. I think, somewhere in 1992. But that's a lovely idea. I love that idea. And I think the thing you talk about with the writer, with an aspiring author too, is that it really is the joy of those days, because there's a lot of really hard days and a lot of days when you're like, I can't do this, or you feel like you can't do it. But the joy of those days where it works, where you feel that thing, that magic, I think that's the thing that's the goal, because who knows what's going to happen, right? With publication, with success, with all of the rest.
The only thing that we can control is writing the best book we possibly can. The rest of publishing world is utter craziness and unpredictability and things that we couldn't even possibly have imagined might happen. And also that sometimes when something happens that we really wanted, and we don't get it, if we don't get something that we really wanted, sometimes when we don't get something that we really wanted and we think, oh, we're doomed, we'll never be happy again, I've failed. Sometimes that failure is the best thing that ever could have happened to you, because something will happen as a result of that wouldn't have happened with it. So we don't even know what's good or bad. I hope that was even in English. We don't even know what's good or bad when it happens.
Right.
It's just the next thing that happens. And we just keep focused, on our book and our lives as writers, and seeing what happens next and being optimistic about it.
I think that's such good advice. I do. I think that's incredible advice. So I want to ask now, even though isn't it the worst question ever to have somebody ask you on the cusp of when your book is coming out, what are you working on now? You're like, ugh, can I just appreciate this moment? But we do want to know. We want to know, Hank, what is next?
Oh, thank you. Well, it is funny because, as writer brains are so fried at every moment, because Her Perfect Life is this way. Her Perfect Life is out now, and The House Guest comes out soon, and I'm happy about that. And that's all in my head. But I did, just breaking news, send in the first draft to my editor, the final first draft of my next book, which is called One Wrong Word. And I even sent it in on time, totally on time, with an ending. Sometimes I'll tell you, I send my books in with no ending. And I think, well, by the time my editor reads the beginning, I'll have the ending done.
I love that. I love it. It's coming. The ending's coming. Well, congratulations. And I love that. I love the title. And so you're on a year. So we're talking about, February of 2024.
I can't even think of that as a date. Does that seem like
crazy?
Really far away.
That's so crazy.
February 7th for the precious, The House.
Yes, and that is actually, this will go live just a couple days before that. So when you're hearing this, it is time, if you do not already have your copy of The House Guest, it is time to get on it, because it is coming to your, it can be delivered to your house that day, or you can go pick it up at your bookstore. So that's super exciting. Before I let you go, Hank, I want you to touch upon this wonderful thing that you and Hannah Mary McKinnon do, because I think it's such a fun thing if people don't know about it. And I've been honored to be on there before. And I think sort of started with the pandemic. So just, can you share a little bit about First Chapter Fun?
Sure. First Chapter Fun, the joy of my life, was started by the fabulous Hannah Mary McKinnon, who is a best-selling author in Canada, at the beginning of the pandemic. And just sort of as a lark, she read the first chapter of her pals' books, once a day, once every day, on Facebook and Instagram. So after she did 53 episodes of that, she was getting ready to, including my books, The Murder List, I think she read.
Yeah.
And she was going to close it and not do it anymore. I said, come on, sweetheart, this is great. You can't not do this. Let's do it together. So long story short, we decided to do it twice a week. And for the past 2.5 years, we've done it twice a week, read the first chapter of a fabulous new book out loud on Instagram and Facebook. So you can watch it now on Tuesdays, every single Tuesday at 12:30 p.m. ET on Instagram and Facebook. Hannah Mary McKinnon or I read the first chapter of a wonderful new book out loud, tell you about the author, tell you about the novel, and then you have this gorgeous taste of the first chapter of so many new books. By the time this is live, we'll be on episode maybe 325.
So crazy. And you guys have both of you, fabulous voices for that. I mean, it is, I sort of was like, oh, I've listened to those and thought, oh, I have to read this book, but I wonder if I can get Hank to read the rest of it for me too. It's just so wonderful to get read to.
Well, it's a huge responsibility. Hannah and I practice before we read it live on the show, because that's your baby, Danielle.
Yeah,
I want to give it the power and the rhythm and the acclaim for how well it's written. And so how well it's read really makes a difference. So thank you. We have fun.
Well, that is really sweet. Hannah read the beginning of my book, Exhume, which is a medical examiner, and there were some words in there because it had some autopsy stuff, and she was like, "I cannot believe you put these words in this for," and of course, I never even imagined, I never thought about who would be, the audio narrator or Hannah or anybody. So she did it perfectly, but that was lovely. So I can see how you'd have to sort of prep for that. So well, anyway, thank you for continuing that, and thank you for stepping in there with Hannah, because those are a real treat, and it's another wonderful way for people to discover new authors, new voices, which is so fun.
Just like this is. I mean, it's so amazing that the pandemic, which was such a disaster, has engendered these wonderful ways for people like you to keep together our community, to keep us discovering new books and discovering new authors and keeping up with our favorite authors or making a new one. This has been a silver lining.
Absolutely. And here's to us. I do think, like you said about writer friends at the beginning of our conversation, those author, communities, and, I only do women because I had to sort of figure out a way to chop there's so many incredible books and authors. I was like, it's too many. I'm just going to focus on the ladies, which, I only a few men grumble. They mostly understand. So, but it is we have an incredible community, and for aspiring authors, that's another thing to find an online group, or your local Sisters in Crime, or Mystery Writers of America, or Romance Writers of America. My first writers group was a romance writers group, even though I never wrote romance. So it can kind of be anybody, I think, but we are very blessed for our incredible community. So
I mean, it's interesting. My first book was when I was working on my first book. I went to a romance writers meeting and met Lisa Gardner.
Yes, who's amazing.
We've been friends ever since. So you just don't know. You just don't know. Every single possibility can bring you unexpected joy.
Absolutely. And that is exactly. And I think authors are very generous. We know what it's like to never have published a book. We've been there. So I think they're incredibly lovely people. And speaking of incredibly lovely or not people, we have The House Guest. So go get your copy of The House Guest, Hank Phillippi Ryan. This is out February 7th. And this is your 14th book?
This is my 14th book. I'm so excited about it. I can just tell you all, I just love The House Guest. I'm proud of it. I'm excited by it. I was surprised by it. I can't wait for you to meet Alyssa and Bree and decide whose side you're on and which character is the cat and which character.
I love it. Yes. Which is the cat and which is the mouse. Yes. Well, me too. I can't wait. And when you find out how much you love this, you've got a big fat backlist to get through as well. Hank, thank you so much for joining us today. It was so fun to chat. You're so brilliant, and it's great to hear about your stories and your incredible career and all your well-earned 100 million awards.
100 million. Thank you. I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that calculation, Danielle, and use it. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so honored to be here.
It was so great. For everybody joining us, this was Killer Women Podcast with Hank Phillippi Ryan, and we will see you next time. Bye.